everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a worldwide audience. We're super excited to have you all. And I'm happy to welcome Alister Benn, who's going to be presenting dynamic and creative processing in minutes with Topaz. Alister is a Scottish artist and a full-time professional landscape photographer, award-winning imagery, awesome stuff that you see here. He's also an author, educator, and guide leading tours and workshops in Europe and the Himalaya. Alister is the author of a number of photography ebooks as well, including Seeing the Unseen, How to Photograph Landscapes at Night, and The Complete Guide to Seascape Photography. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Alister.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's afternoon here in Scotland anyway. First of all, just a big thank you to Nicole and everyone at Topaz for arranging this. It's so great to be able to do this. I was joking with her earlier that I'm now talking to more people on air than actually live in the village that I live in, so it's we don't see so many people up here. Before I actually start processing images in Lightroom and Photoshop, I just wanted to run through some slides that I prepared, which kind of give an overview of where we're going with this, and just to cover some ground rules, because there's no point in talking about processing unless we've already established what, for example, a good exposure is. So without much further ado, let's crack on, because I've got quite a lot I want to cover in this afternoon's session. Topaz webinar. I'm Alister Benn, and I run a company called Available Light Images with my wife, Joanne Lee, who is standing next to me here in the Himalaya. As Nicole said, I'm a full-time photographer, author, and educator. And I like to take images that are expressive. I really think the most important thing about making photographs is using them to get across to a third party, someone who wasn't there, something not only of what the place looked like, but what it felt like, how I felt to be there, what the place was doing for me as an experience. And that's actually a little bit harder than it first appears, because experiences that we have in the outdoors are made up of many things. They're not just visual, they're atmospheric. There are sounds, there are bears in the woods, there are nightly noises if you're out photographing at night, there's ethereal things that are going on, and of course there's sounds, the wind and birds calling and all that type of stuff. So photographs have to go an awful long way to actually articulate an awful lot more of the experience than just what the place looked like. So dynamic and creative processing in minutes. The reason I've said in minutes is because if you look historically at photography, people like Ansel Adams used to spend somewhere in the region of 200 hours in the darkroom to create an expressive dynamic print. And now in 2015, we have an awful lot more power at our fingertips through our computers, and using digital photography in particular to make images that can be incredibly expressive, and we can do it very, very quickly. What we're going to go through this afternoon isn't necessarily my complete workflow. It's a snapshot, of what we can do in a short amount of time, purely because not every image that we take we're going to turn into some masterpiece that is going to take maybe 45 minutes or an hour, or maybe even a couple of hours if it's quite a complex scenario. A lot of images we take, we just want to make them look as good as possible quickly so that we can move on to the next one. And the first thing I really want to cover is this whole concept of good exposures. The camera does not see the world that we see. A camera wants to average out reality. This is a raw file taken on the island of Iceland one autumn a few years ago. And I want you to understand what the word 0 EV means. If you shoot your camera in aperture priority with no exposure compensation, then the camera will take a very averaged exposure. In this particular scenario, it's all midtones, so the histogram that we can see in the top right-hand corner here, everything is peaking in the midtones. So there's very little contrast, everything is in the middle, but the camera has basically averaged out everything. With digital cameras, we want to aim to record scenes in camera that look more like this, which is exposed more to the right. And that's purely a technical attribute of digital photography, that the sensors actually record more detail in the right-hand side, in the highlights end, than in the shadows end. And one of the biggest problems we have is noise in our photographs. And if we produce dark and moody raw files, i.e. very underexposed, they're more likely to have noise in them. So in this particular case, I've added 1.65 stops to get what I would call my perfect exposure for this scene. This is not what the final photograph is going to look like, as I'm going to demonstrate to you very shortly. But what the raw file is going to look like should be something more in line with this. The final image, and this is on its way to being final, is actually fine-tuned in processing. And by fine-tuned, I mean we produce the image that we want to show to a viewer so that we can articulate something of that place and the emotional response that we had at that time of capture. The camera ain't going to see this, okay? So the word I've used an awful lot so far is contrast, and dynamic and expressive processing is all about contrast. We start off with global contrast, which is the difference between the brightest point and the darkest point. So this image of Mount Assiniboine in the Canadian Rockies shows high contrast because there's a high contrast between the bright areas and the dark areas. So globally, it's quite a high contrast scene. Local contrast is when you start looking at the brightness and darkness in smaller portions. So in here, we have contrast between these yellow trees and the green trees and these rocks. Detail is also contrast. We can have images here. So you would say the sky is low contrast, but the forest is high contrast. We can have color contrast as well. We can have cooler tones in shadows and warmer tones in highlights. Contrast determines mood, and it determines mood because the human brain is psychologically tuned in to actually respond to contrast. Back in the olden days, if you didn't see a tiger hiding in the grass, you were dead. So we were very good at spotting order out of chaos. Moods manage people's emotions, and one of the things that I'm most excited about in landscape photography is actually making statements with my photographs. I want to have some control over what the viewer gets from where I was and what I've been up to in my life. So photography is a visual language, and by that I mean we're using it to articulate something. We're not using words. If I stop talking, then this photograph has to tell you everything that I want to tell you about this moment up in the Himalaya. If it doesn't do that very well, then I'm not being very articulate. So my big thing right now is using my photographs to psychologically manipulate, for want of a better word, the viewing experience. And I just want to explain to you before we move forward some of these little psychological twists that we can use in our photographs to help, I'm going to use the word again, manipulate our viewers. It sounds very sinister, but it's not really. So this warm rendition of that image that we looked at before is quite inviting. It's some would say it's optimistic, some would say it's much more bright and airy. If we look at this rendition of it, it's the same raw file, it's just been worked in a different way. But because we have warm and cool areas, it's much more mysterious, it's much more 3D, because what happens is that blue, cooler areas will tend to recede into the frame, and brighter, warmer areas will seem to pop out of the frame. And if we compare these two images side by side, you will notice how much more 3D the latter image is. This is just something we can use to help steer our viewers through the frame a little bit better and to give a much more deep and meaningful experience for them. Finally, black and white photography is another very commonly used tool these days. We do it from choice now. It's not a technical limitation anymore. And we use black and white for lots of different things, one of which is departure from reality. This is no longer in any shape or form real. There are no right or wrong ways to process images. You will see here another rendition of that same raw file. If there's no right or wrong way. So basically, I can't turn around to you and say, oh, that's the wrong way. I can turn around and say that I don't like it, but that's just my personal choice. It's not wrong. And I believe that all people who have cameras in their hands have a right to process images any way they want. If I had to ask the question, which of these is real, and that's the 4 that we looked at already, you can't really answer that. They're all as real as each other, or less real, or not real. It doesn't really matter. The point is they all say different things about that place and that time and about me. So when I say exactly, it's basically saying you can't answer that question. There's no such thing as reality when it comes to landscape photography. Photography is a visual art. We use photographs to express opinions and to communicate emotions. Landscape photography is not photojournalism, where the images have a right to be real. Otherwise, people get into all sorts of trouble. Creativity is a choice, and we have the right to draw our own line in the sand. We can make our images as real or unreal, or surrealistic, or abstract, or dynamic as we want them to be. This photograph taken in Banff under the light of the full moon is not what I saw. If I showed you what I had seen, it would be a very, very dark frame, which does not make a very good photograph. So we use image processing to show you things. Well, one of my books, Seeing the Unseen, I'm showing you what I didn't see, but what I wish I'd seen. Is this real? Rice terraces in southern China, very black and white, very ethereal. West coast of Scotland, dynamic beams of light across the hillside. Again, processing helps to enhance these things and to make them better than life in some regard. And finally, we have no technical limitations anymore. This image was made up of 7 different exposures for highlights and shadows, blended together using Photoshop, color and contrast enhanced and changed with Topaz filters, such as adjust, restyle. I used denoise in this. I used the remask to make selections, to make sure they were accurate. We have no technical limitations anymore. So I'm sure you're all bored of listening to me already, so let's make some photographs and introducing Lightroom. Now, what I've done is I've chosen a few images here, the first of which is the one we looked at earlier on. And this is not a webinar which is to do with how to do things. You know, I think, yes, I'm going to be demonstrating how to do certain things, but I really want to talk about why I'm doing things. And the why is unique to me and it's unique to you. And I think it's really important when you move forward in your own photography that you develop images that you like and you use tools and you make images that are expressive to you. I can't tell you how to process your images because you have lived your life for X number of years and you're the one who's making that choice. But what we do have to do is we have to understand that all of these tools do certain things. And before you move forward with any development, you need to understand this. Your camera is a tool. It doesn't do anything on its own. Mine sat in the cupboard just now. It's not out making photographs. I have a guitar on the wall. It's not doing anything right now. It's waiting for me to pick it up. Lightroom is the same. This raw file isn't going to work itself. Now, Topaz produce incredible plugins, and I use them in just about every single image that I use. But I always pre-prep in Lightroom because it's the old acronym of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. I want to give Topaz stuff to work on. I want it to be able to sink its teeth into something. And I can do that by prepping this file far, far better. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to create contrast because contrast equals impact. If we put this on the internet, people are not going to get very excited about it. So what I want to do is, first of all, with the curves tool, just go in and start setting these black and white points. I just want to say I don't use a mouse, I actually use a Wacom, and for this type of work, it can be a little clumsy, so bear with me. Right, so the first thing we've done is we've increased the contrast by darkening the blacks and pushing the whites up. And all of a sudden, we have created something that's instantly far more appealing. But we are not finished. So I want to produce something that's going to be expressive. So the first thing I have to ask myself is, what am I trying to express? What do I want to say about this? Now, I think images should reflect your personality, and my personality is a little bit dark and mysterious, but also has quite a bit of optimism thrown in as well. So I tend, and this is just my personal way of doing things, I tend to make images that are quite contrasty. So in terms of cools and darks and warms and lights. So what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to just really create something that's got a lot more pop to it. So what I've done is I've used the temperature slider to make things a little cooler. And I look at the temperature slider and the exposure sliders as mood sliders, because cooler is more sinister and slightly depressing, whereas warmer is obviously a lot more optimistic and a little bit more vibrant. But I want to give Topaz something to work on, because I want to produce cool and warm in here. I'm not going to do anything else just now. I'm going to right-click on this image and go Edit in Fusion Express 2, which is the interface that allows Topaz to work within Lightroom. Quite a lot of what I'm going to do this afternoon is just going to use Lightroom. We will look at a little bit of more advanced working later on. I'm going to use Adjust for this first example. As you can see, I use all the Topaz plugins, but for this one, I'm just going to use Adjust. We will move on to Photoshop a little later on if we have some time. Otherwise, Topaz are going to have to ask me back again. Now, just in the Classic Collection, this is you have a snapshot of all the different looks and feels. If you don't know what you want to say about an image, you can use any of these presets as a guide. And basically, you can go through and basically quickly scroll through that side and just say, okay, cool tone 2. I like that. That's doing for me roughly what I wanted to do. It's created the blue, it's created the warmth, it's created the contrast. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to apply that because it's already a long way down the road to actually looking the way I want it to look. Because I'm using RAW files, and these are quite big RAW files, these are 36 megapixel RAW files, even with a powerful computer, some of these plugins can take a little bit of time to work. The second thing I'm just going to do is add a simple pop. These two things are my favorites. I tend to use them a lot, and I'm going to click OK. And this will save it back into Lightroom, and we can make a few little finishing touches in Lightroom. But this, like I said, I don't necessarily, if you want to learn how to use Topaz Adjust, there's a dozen different tutorials actually on the website that go a long way to teaching how these things work. And it really just requires you to put a little bit of time and effort into that yourselves. So I feel that the vibrance is maybe a fraction high, and I can go in with the saturation slider. I'm just going to just play around with those blues a little bit. And this is just an interface that I'm familiar with. The final thing I'm going to do with this image here in Lightroom is I'm just going to create a vignette using the vignette tool, because something I really like to do an awful lot is make sure the eye stays really zoned in that center section of the frame. So there we have a very, very quick, and if I just go back into the original and reset it, and then go back to here and select both of those, and we can look at them side by side. This is where we started with our raw file, and this is where we went in just a couple of minutes in Lightroom and Topaz Adjust. This has a lot more impact. It really shows these ancient lava flows coming down this hillside. It's got way more mystery. It's got a lot more 3D to it. So as you can see, we can achieve pretty powerful things in just a couple of minutes. Photographs are never finished. We just literally get to a point where we're prepared to walk away from them. I could take this into Photoshop. I could continue playing with it in Lightroom. There's a dozen different things I could do to this image. I was joking with Nicole earlier on that I'm never worried about people copying my style, because I can't even copy myself. I couldn't work an image the same way twice. I'm mindful of wanting to cover quite a lot of ground this afternoon, and I think I'm going to work on this one next. There are so many different things I could show you how to do this afternoon, and I'm just mindful that we're going to run out of time. So let us look at another example. This is a mountain called Choi Oyo in Tibet. It's a 8,000 meter peak. It's a real whopper. And I'm going to work this again quite quickly. You can see that it's exposed to the right, so it looks really washed out and it looks really flat. This viewpoint is about 4,500 meters, so whatever that is, 13, 14, 15,000 feet. Very thin air. It's a very interesting, exciting place, and it was freezing cold. So I'm going to do my other, my standard thing, which is I'm going to make it slightly darker to start off with. I'm going to show you another little trick, which is using the camera calibration, and I'm going to use it to, if you use the blue saturation slider, you can see what an impact that has, not just on the blues, but on those warmer tones as well. And it really allows me to punch a huge amount of impact into that sky and into those shadows. And then I can use my temperature slider to just fine-tune the mood of this image. And, you know, it really does boil down to feel. I don't believe that you can actually say, in this situation do this, and in this situation do that. I really believe that whenever I'm teaching students how to do things, they have to start to understand what these different sliders do, and you kind of have to have a look that you're aiming for, or at least an idea of what you like. So this is me getting to my starting point. Now I'm at a point where I'm saying, okay, let's take this into Topaz. Again, into Fusion Express. And again, I'm going to go into Adjust, and I'm going to repeat the same process that I did the last time, because I like it. And the idea with this one is I want to make sure that I am getting all of those cool tones in the shadows, and at the same time giving the thing a lot of depth. So cool tone seems to be the one that works for me, and I'm kind of happy with that. I could spend time on here, I could spend time making masks or whatever, but at this stage I'm not going to. I'm just going to apply this straight away, because we're going to take this one into Photoshop, because we're going to make another couple of adjustments in there. So once we have this in Photoshop, I'm really happy with that. Sorry, in Lightroom again. So I'm going to edit this in Photoshop. We will edit another copy, because then we can compare the one that we work in Photoshop back into this one. Okay, now whenever we want to, just one thing for note, I have my toolbar on the right here. I always have all my tools on the right. I don't like diving back and forward across the screen. This is actually a simplification of my normal working toolbar. You will notice I've got a couple of extensions in here which I use because I do use some more complex tools. Right, the bottom line here is that we need to start looking at this image as a series of zones. So we have this foreground hill, we then have a middle ground, we have a peak, a big snowy peak, which is texturally and tonally very different, and we've got the sky. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 primary zones in this image that can all be treated differently. Now, when we start working images in Photoshop, and once we move away from global adjustments, because everything we've done so far to this image has been global, everything we've done has happened to the whole image. We're not just looking at bits. If I want to make an adjustment to this bit in the foreground without affecting the background, then we have to select the foreground in some way. So let's just, before we start playing with some more Topaz stuff, let me just have a quick look at a levels curve, and let's just say we want to increase the contrast or the brightness of that foreground a little, but we don't want it to go all the way back. every layer that you produce comes with its own mask. Oops, I don't know what happened there. Dum, 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 dum. What's going on? Boom, 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 boom. There we go. Right, so on this mask, if I want to just draw a simple gradient from white to black, then the foreground gets it and the background doesn't. That's not a very sophisticated change, but it's all that's required in this instance. If I want to select the sky and make some change to the sky without affecting the background, then we have to get a little bit more sophisticated with our selection process. And really, the only difference between simple processing and the really advanced processing is the sophistication of the selections that we make. We can make a selection with just this lasso tool and just say, I'm going to select that front bit, make a new curves adjustment layer, and add contrast to that foreground. And then, of course, we need to refine the selection. And we do Command H to hide the marching ants and feather. And that diffuses that. If I just select those two layers and stick them in a group, so we can just see the foreground there, how it's changed. So what I hope this demonstrates is that we can do things to different parts of the image without affecting other parts of the image. And we do that through using layers and selections. I did mention to Nicole that I'm going to write an article for the Topaz blog, which will be getting posted in the next couple of weeks, that will explain all of this stuff. So don't worry too much if I'm running ahead of you. It will all be revealed in the future. So let us do Command J. Sorry, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a new background layer. In fact, I'm just going to flatten this and then do Command J. Because when you use Topaz in Photoshop, you need to be able to work on a new layer. So I'm going to go back into, I think I'm going to use Clarity. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to make an adjustment just for the sky. So I want to make something into the sky that is going to, let's say clouds. Let's have a look at clouds. Because what I want to do is I want to make an adjustment for the sky and then mask the sky so that, okay, so that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. So that's making them a little bit too bum, 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 bum. Let's just have a look. Okay, I want to go for that. I'm just going to make them a little bit more vibrant and dynamic. So I'm going to click OK, and that will take it back into... Right, so as we will see, the effect on the sky is great. It's made it really sunsetty, but it's gone way too far with the foreground. So what I'm going to do is produce a new layer. The keyboard shortcut that I use is Command I, which inverts that mask and turns it into a black mask. So everything is now hidden. Now we need to select the sky so that we're only seeing the sky. And I use this, it's called the Quick Selection tool. It's the quickest and easiest way to make selections, and it's done a pretty good job. We hold down the Alt key to subtract areas from masks, and I can zoom in a fraction. And again, with the Alt key, these masks actually don't have to be crazy accurate. A lot of people get really hung up on them. If you're going to make big dramatic changes, then yeah, maybe. But a lot of the time, I'm just going to refine that mask. Smart radius, tick it usually go to about 1.5, 1.9 pixels, and that just snaps the edge to the edge of that there, and then select, save selection, and I'm just going to call that sky because it means we're going to use it time and time again, and you'll see that we now have a new channel called sky. I'm going to press Command D to deselect that, or alternatively you can go into here and select and reselect and inverse there. Right, so I've now got a black mask on top of this selection, and what I want to do is I want to show you the effect that we made for the sky without it bleeding into the foreground. But the way to do it so that it looks natural is to get a white brush, and I hold down the Control and Alt key, and that allows me to vary the opacity and the size of the brush by dragging and clicking. It's just a really cool way to do it. And I'm going to paint this effect into the sky, but you can see that it's gone over the edge and it's gone onto that peak, which now looks quite hideous, to be perfectly honest with you. But the sky looks cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the sky by command clicking on that layer mask. I'm now going to go Command Shift I to inverse the selection, which means I'm now selecting just the bottom, and then I'm going to go Command H, which hides the marching ants. And I'm now going to use a black brush, Control Alt drag, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity to about 30%. So a black brush, if you understand masks, it's white reveals and black conceals. So at the moment, black conceals, so we're not seeing any of that top layer showing through. We're just seeing the bottom layer. White reveals, which means we're seeing the effect on this mask here. So if I start painting with a black brush, I'm slowly actually going to start erasing that effect just from the peak and the hillside here, because we are erasing the effect that we painted on a moment or two earlier. And what that allows us to do is to produce something that is really flawless, because we've made this beautiful sky impacting onto this here. In fact, that there looks like it hasn't been, so I need to paint that back in with white and invert the selection again. There we go. Right, so that is one way in which to produce selections and allow you to paint in different parts into different things. Now I can use any effect that I want on here. If we wanted to, we could open this up and restyle. We could open this up and make a black and white image. In fact, that might be a cool thing to do. We have a little bit of time left. So I am going to layer, I'm just going to flatten the image again, and then just do Command J to make a new Topaz layer, which we will just call BW, and then quickly into Topaz, into BW effects. Sometimes color can really overwhelm scenes. I find myself quite often working images in color, and I like them in color, and they're very dramatic. But at the same time, I also find that they can be really overpowering. So what I am going to do is, again, you can quickly skim through the presets and have a quick look and see if there's anything in there that kind of catches your fancy. And I think I'm going to just do this manually. I am going to, again, I do all of these things by feel. So in terms of teaching exactly why, I just want to produce something that I like. So I'm going to head for something that sums up the scene kind of well. So let me think. This is somewhere that people have been climbing for dozens and dozens of years. So it's got a lot of history associated to it. So I don't think we need to get too crazy in terms of what we're going to do, but we certainly want to, I do want it to be a bit moodier, because moody is what I do. I'm just going to tone down those blacks a fraction. Okay, that's cool. I'm happy enough with that at this point in time. So we'll take it back into Photoshop, and we now have a black and white layer. Now, when you have a black and white layer, if we compare that to the color image that we had, if we wanted to, we can use either the black and white image as it stands. We can use selections to darken the sky, should we wish, because we have that sky selection that we've already made. So we can do that. Or we can even use the black and white layer as a contrast mask for the foreground. And that was kind of what I had in mind, was using a black and white contrast layer to determine the contrast that we're going to have in our final image. It's a really incredible way of dialing in contrast into scenes without actually playing around with the contrast of the color image at all. Yeah, happy with that. So if we save this back into Lightroom, we're going to get to a stage where we can very quickly come back into Lightroom, and I'm just going to find the NEF file. So if I reset that, so that's the starting point, and that was the one we did in that we just finished with. So if we look at where we started and where we got to, we're obviously looking at huge leaps and bounds from where we started to where we finished. And the one word I would really like you to take away from this short session is intention. We have to have intention. When I open my mouth to speak to you, I have it running through my head what I want to say. I have an intention. It's my intention this afternoon to talk to you about Lightroom and Topaz. When I'm posting an image on the internet, I have to have an intention. It's about impact. It's about articulating something about the place so that you, as the viewer, get to experience that place somewhat. I'm mindful that we're a little short on time, but let's have a very, very quick look at this. This is just another scene from Mount Assiniboine in the Canadian Rockies. So let's just repeat some of those steps that we touched on earlier. We push our whites and pull down our blacks, which instantly creates more contrast. I'm then going to use my temperature slider to determine the mood of the image. So there was some nice warm light there. Now look at the impact that that camera calibration tool had on this particular image. It doesn't work with all images, but it certainly works on quite a few. And it's really just a case of fine-tuning that color in there. I'm going to add a fraction of clarity, and let's just have a very quick look in Fusion Express, and let's just have a quick look at what Topaz Adjust does to this. And really, you know, we had literally 2 or 3 minutes here, so this is going to be a super quick rendition of this image. But I would like to think that in 2 minutes we can produce something that looks pretty incredible. I'm going to again just quickly skim through some of these presets and kind of go with just a simple pop in this scenario here, and click OK. There's someone playing bagpipes outside my window. How Scottish is that? So this is just going to open back into Lightroom, and then I'm just going to finish it off very quickly in Lightroom. And that little pop, it's done an awful lot of work. It's subtle, but it's actually done an awful lot of work that would have taken me an awful lot longer to do in some other way. And that's one of the beauties of Topaz, is that we can do things quickly that used to take a long time. So these are just a couple more adjustments, and we're going to end up with an image that I think it's a very, very good starting point for further work, that's for sure. And I think I'm getting to the stage where I'm kind of happy with that. And if we just take that back in and compare it to what we started out with, yeah, we can certainly say that this one has an awful lot more impact than this one, and it goes an awful lot longer, an awful lot further to explain how I felt stood there on this beautiful morning back in September last year than this gives. And I think the initial presentation I made at the very start, which explains why RAW files look like this, they're flat, they're averaged, they're not supposed to be final images. We make our final images in Lightroom, and we use Topaz plugins and Photoshop to get increasingly more control over what we want to do.
Awesome. That was fantastic, Alister. Thank you so much.